Keanu Reeves stood at the gate of Terminal C, staring through the wide glass windows at the plane that would carry him back to Los Angeles. The early morning sun broke through the clouds, painting the runway in soft gold. Most people in the crowded terminal did not notice him, just another traveler in a black hoodie, worn jeans, and tired eyes hidden behind sunglasses. He liked it that way. To the world he was a star, a hero on screens. But here he was just a man hoping for a quiet flight home after a long week of work and late-night shoots that had left him bone-tired. His phone buzzed in his pocket with another message from his manager, some reminder about a press event, something to sign, someone to meet. He ignored it. All he wanted now was a seat, a window to lean against, and a few hours where no one asked him for anything. When the boarding call for first class came over the speakers, he slipped into the line behind a pair of businessmen who kept looking over their shoulders, whispering to each other when they recognized him. Keanu offered them a small, polite smile, hoping it would be enough to stop any selfies or small talk. As he reached the boarding agent, he felt a small sense of relief. A few more steps, and he would be in his seat, headphones in, eyes closed, alone with his thoughts. But the relief vanished when the gate agent scanned his ticket and frowned. She glanced at her screen, then at Keanu, then back at the screen. People in line behind him shifted impatiently. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice tight with forced politeness. "There seems to be an issue with your seat." Keanu's eyebrows lifted just a bit above his sunglasses. "An issue I booked weeks ago." The gate agent glanced over his shoulder at the line building up. "One moment, please step aside." Keanu stepped to the side, the weight of 100 curious eyes pressing against his back. He could feel whispers start to grow behind him. Why is he being stopped? Is it really him? Maybe he's causing trouble? The questions were a low hum that made the tiredness in his bones feel heavier. The businessmen stepped forward, tickets in hand, not bothering to hide their smug smiles as they passed him. The agent spoke in hushed tones with another employee, pointing at her screen, at Keanu's ticket, then shaking her head like this was some mistake she couldn't fix. Every second felt longer than the last. Keanu felt a knot form in his chest, not from anger, but from the echo of old memories, times when he had stood in lines much worse than this, told he didn't belong, told to wait while others passed him by. Finally, the agent turned back to him. "Mr. Reeves, I'm afraid your first-class seat has been reassigned. We're overbooked." Keanu blinked, a slow breath escaping his lips, and she didn't meet his eyes. "We can offer you a seat in the back of economy. You'll still get to your destination." He looked past her at the line moving forward, people tapping at phones, pretending not to stare. He didn't care about the comfort of first class. He didn't care about the champagne or the legroom or the hot meal. What stung was the quiet disrespect, the feeling that even after all he'd done, he could be pushed aside like he didn't matter. But deep inside, a small voice, the same one his mother had given him, reminded him to stay calm, to stay kind. "It's fine," he said softly, his voice carrying more strength than the agent expected. "Give my seat to someone who needs it more." He took the crumpled economy ticket she handed him, stepped out of the line, and walked slowly toward the back of the boarding group. His feet dragged a little as he thought of the hours ahead, squeezed between strangers, knees pressed against a seat back. No quiet corner to rest his tired head. But he pushed the thought away. He had been through worse. He could handle this too. As he stood at the back of the boarding line, a young woman with a baby on her hip caught his eye. She was juggling a diaper bag, a bottle, and a folded stroller, while trying to hush the baby's soft cries. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Keanu saw it, the exhaustion that went deeper than any first-class seat could fix. He stepped closer, his voice gentle. "You need a hand." She looked startled, but nodded gratefully. "I'm sorry, I'm so tired." He hasn't slept since. Keanu took the folded stroller from her, holding it under one arm while she adjusted the baby against her shoulder. The people in line looked away quickly, pretending they didn't see the man they'd whispered about, now carrying someone else's burden without a second thought. When they reached the plane door, the flight attendant recognized him instantly, her eyes wide. "Mr. Reeves, is everything all right? Keanu nodded, handing the stroller over. All good. Can you help her get settled? The young mother's eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. Thank you. I don't even know how to say thank you. Keanu gave her a small, warm smile. You don't have to. He stepped past her, walking down the narrow aisle to find his new seat near the back. The plane smelled of stale coffee and the heavy perfume of strangers. He squeezed past knees and bags until he found his spot, the middle seat, of course. He lowered himself down, knees bumping the seat ahead, arms pressed tight against his sides. For a moment, a flicker of bitterness tried to grow inside him, but he closed his eyes, letting it drift away like an old ghost. Sometimes, he reminded himself, the measure of who you are is not in how you're treated when you're on top, but how you stand when you're pushed to the bottom. Just as he settled in, the captain's calm voice crackled over the speakers. The usual announcements about flight time and weather drifted through the cabin. But then the captain's tone changed, warmer somehow. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain said, his voice carrying through the rows of tired travelers. I'd like to take a moment to recognize someone special on board today. Keanu Reeves gave up his first-class seat to make sure we could help another family in need. We don't see that every day. Thank you for reminding us that respect and kindness don't need a seat number. A hush fell over the cabin, soft gasps, a few quiet claps that grew into something real. Not for the movie star, but for the man who chose to stand when he could have walked away. Keanu felt his face grow warm. He looked down, trying to hide the small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He didn't need applause. He just needed the reminder that a single act of kindness, no matter how small, could travel farther than any plane ever could. And as the engines roared to life and the plane lifted into the brightening sky, Keanu leaned, his head back against the seat, eyes closed at last, his heart quiet and steady. He knew that the story of this flight wouldn't end when the wheels touched down. It would travel from one heart to another, a simple reminder that respect, humility, and kindness could find a place even at 30,000 feet in the air. Keanu Reeves sat wedged in that middle seat, the steady hum of the engines vibrating through his tired body. The window shade was half open, spilling soft morning light across his face. Beside him, an older woman slept with her head bobbing gently against the seat. On the other side, a teenager with headphones tapped at a phone, never once looking up. For a moment, it felt almost peaceful, just a plane like any other, a sky like any other. But deep inside, something restless stirred in Keanu's chest, a quiet whisper that tonight's small moment of kindness might be only the beginning. He closed his eyes, letting the drone of the engines pull him back into memories he usually kept locked away. He remembered the years when flying coach wasn't a problem, when it was a luxury. He remembered long bus rides and cheap motel rooms, eating noodles out of a cup because that's all he could afford. He remembered strangers who gave him a ride, who bought him lunch, who told him you matter without ever using those words. Maybe that's why it always mattered so much to him now, the chance to pass it on, to stand up when others looked away. The captain's words still echoed in his mind. Respect and kindness don't need a seat number. Keanu turned the words over like a stone in his hand, feeling their weight, their truth. He wished the world remembered that more often. He wished he could do more than small moments that faded when the plane landed. A soft cry pulled him back to the present. He turned his head and saw the young mother from earlier a few rows ahead. Her baby fussed against her chest, fists flailing, tiny cheeks flushed red with frustration. She bounced him gently, whispering lullabies that seemed to break in her throat. The people around her shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other with annoyed looks that said, why can't she control her child? Keanu felt anger twist in his chest, not at the baby, not at her, but at the cold looks people gave when they forgot that sometimes life is messy, loud, and needs grace instead of judgment. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood, ignoring the sideways glances as he squeezed past knees and elbows. The aisle seemed to stretch forever as he stepped forward, bending slightly to meet the young mother's eyes. She looked up, surprise and embarrassment mixing on her tired face. You okay? Keanu asked softly, his voice warm enough to cut through the hum of the plane. Her eyes darted to the people beside her, then back to him. He's just tired. He didn't sleep all night. I'm so sorry if he's bothering people. Keanu shook his head, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He's not bothering me. Do you want to swap seats? You can have mine. Maybe you'll have a little more room to stretch out with him. Her mouth fell open. Words caught somewhere between gratitude and disbelief. But your seat is. Not much, Keanu chuckled, glancing back at his cramped middle seat. But it's something. And it comes with a window view. She laughed then, a soft, surprised sound that made the baby pause his crying for a heartbeat. You're serious, dead serious, Keanu said. I've got nowhere to be but right here. Let me help. People around them shifted, some pretending not to listen, others stealing quick glances. One older man muttered under his breath about celebrities being dramatic, but Keanu ignored it. He helped her gather her things. The diaper bag, the bottle, the baby blanket that smelled faintly of milk and lavender. When they squeezed back down the aisle together, Keanu felt the eyes on him, felt the ripple of surprise and quiet shame as people realized how quick they'd been to judge. He settled into the cramped row, now squeezed against the aisle with a small smile on his face. The young mother lowered herself carefully into his old seat, adjusting her baby who had already begun to settle, soothed by the small change. She mouthed thank you through the seats, her eyes wide and glassy. Keanu gave her a small nod in return, then pulled the cheap airline blanket over his lap. The teenager next to him finally looked up, pulling his headphones down. Are you really Keanu Reeves? Keanu chuckled, running a hand through his hair. Last time I checked, the boy's eyes widened. But you're in the worst seat on the plane. Keanu shrugged, leaning back. Sometimes the worst seat is where you meet the best people. The boy laughed awkwardly, then fell silent. Keanu leaned his head back and closed his eyes again, letting the boy's words sink in. It was true, in a way. You learned more in the cramped rows and the long lines than you ever did behind the curtain of first class. Here, nobody bowed, nobody filtered their words. Here, you saw who people really were when they thought nobody important was watching. In our past. Then, too, turbulence rocked the plane gently, the seatbelt sign dinging overhead. Keanu watched the mother sleep at last, her head resting against the window, her baby curled up in her lap like a tiny dream. The sight tugged at something in him, a reminder that sometimes kindness isn't about big gestures, but small moments that let someone breathe again, even just for a few hours. As the flight dragged on, the boy next to him tapped his arm again. Can I ask you something? Keanu turned, his eyes kind. Sure. The boy hesitated, fumbling with the cord of his headphones. Do you ever get tired, of being nice? Of always helping people? Keanu let out a breath that was half a laugh, half a sigh. He looked past the boy, through the aisle, through the sleeping passengers who'd never know what this flight had cost him. Sometimes, he said honestly, sometimes it feels heavy. But then I remember the people who helped me when they didn't have to. I remember what it felt like when someone saw me. And I think, maybe if I do it enough, someone else will too. The boy nodded, his eyes thoughtful. My dad says kindness is for people who want something back. Keanu's eyes softened, a hint of sadness buried deep in his chest. Kindness is what you do when you know you might get nothing back. That's what makes it matter. The boy fell quiet, looking down at his phone. Keanu let the silence settle, a quiet weight that didn't feel heavy at all. Outside the window, clouds drifted past like soft islands in a sea of blue. He closed his eyes again, the hum of the engines, carrying him back to that simple truth. Kindness did not need a seat number. Respect did not come with a price. Humility did not need a stage. And somewhere in the crowded cabin, a story took root, a simple, quiet story that would live on long after the wheels touched down. Because sometimes, a cramped seat in the back of a plane could carry more meaning than the softest bed in first class. Keanu Reeves rested his head back against the seat, eyes half closed as the plane hummed through the clouds. The young mother and her baby were finally asleep 2 rows ahead, curled up peacefully in the seat he'd given up without a second thought. The teenager beside him was watching a movie on his phone, now earbuds snug in his ears. his restless questions replaced by the steady, easy quiet of someone who had seen something that would stick in his mind for a long time. Keanu could feel it. This small moment was changing something for that boy, planting a seed he might carry for life. As Keanu shifted to stretch his sore back, he noticed the older woman on his other side was awake now. She wore a soft blue cardigan and had the kind of gentle eyes that made you feel like you were talking to someone's grandmother. She had stayed silent all flight, but now she turned her head, studying him like she knew there was more behind his tired smile than just a famous name. "You did a good thing back there," she said, her voice warm but firm, like she was testing his reaction. Keanu gave her a small smile, tucking his hands together in his lap. "It was nothing." The woman chuckled softly, the laugh lines at the corners of her eyes deepening. "Kindness is never nothing, young man. Not in this world." Keanu looked out the window, watching sunlight flash across the wing. "Maybe, but it feels like it's not enough. Sometimes it feels like whatever you do, there's always more hurt out there waiting." The woman leaned closer, her perfume light and old-fashioned, like flowers pressed between pages of a book. "You can't fix the whole world, but you can hold up one piece of it for someone else. Sometimes that's all it takes. You give a piece of yourself so someone else can stand." Her words sank into him like warm tea seeping into cold hands. He thought about that a lot, how one small moment could ripple out into the world, touching people you'd never meet. He remembered the countless strangers who had done that for him when he was young, hungry, invisible. Maybe they never knew how much they'd saved him. Maybe they'd forgotten him entirely. But he hadn't forgotten them, not ever. "What about you?" Keanu asked her, his voice low so as not to wake the boy beside him. "Have you ever had to hold up someone's piece of the world?" The woman's eyes drifted to the window, far away. "My husband. Years ago. He was so sick. Everyone told me it was hopeless. They said he wouldn't last a month, but I stayed by him every day, every night, until he was strong enough to smile again. We didn't win in the end. He still went home. But for a little while, he lived, really lived, because someone believed he was worth the fight." Keanu felt a soft ache in his chest. He looked at her hands, resting on her lap, fingers knotted together but steady. "You're right," he said finally. "Maybe it's not about winning. Maybe it's just about not looking away." The woman smiled then, the kind of smile that comes from years of surviving and still finding reasons to be kind. "Exactly, young man. Exactly that." A gentle chime overhead signaled that they were starting to descend. The seatbelt sign flickered on. Flight attendants moved quietly down the aisle, checking latches, whispering instructions to sleepy passengers. Keanu felt the shift in the air, the way the hum of the engines deepened as the plane dropped lower through the layers of cloud. He leaned forward, peering ahead at the mother and baby now stirring awake. The baby let out a soft cry, stretching tiny arms before curling back into his mother's chest. She looked back, eyes meeting Keanu's for a heartbeat. She mouthed thank you again, her lips trembling with the weight of gratitude too big to say out loud in a plane full of strangers. Keanu touched his forehead with 2 fingers, a quiet promise that he'd heard her, that he carried it with him. He knew they'd probably never meet again. She'd gather her bags, buckle her baby into a stroller, and disappear into the crowd. But maybe, just maybe, she'd tell her child one day about the tired man and coach who made her believe that good people still existed. The wheels thumped onto the runway with a soft jolt that pulled everyone back to the present. The teenager beside him flinched awake, glancing out the window with wide eyes. The older woman closed her eyes, murmuring a quiet prayer of thanks under her breath. Keanu felt the tension slip from his shoulders, replaced by a steady calm that settled deep in his bones. The plane taxied toward the gate, the hum of excited chatter filling the narrow aisles as people grabbed at overhead bags, stepped over knees, and shuffled into lines that barely moved. Keanu stayed seated, no rushing. His chest, he watched the mother struggle to gather her things, the baby fussing against her shoulder. Before he could even think, the teenager beside him was already up, stepping forward. "I'll help her," the boy said, his voice low but sure, like, "You did." Keanu felt something warm spread through his tired body, a quiet pride that had nothing to do with movies or fame. He leaned back, letting the moment play out. The boy helped the young mother hoist her bag down, held the stroller steady while she settled the baby. No cameras, no big stage. Just one small act of kindness, passed on like a candle in the dark. As they shuffled down the jet bridge, Keanu felt the fresh morning air brush his face. The older woman walked beside him, her small suitcase rolling behind her. At the end of the bridge, the captain stood waiting, his uniform crisp, his eyes warm. Reeves, the captain said, holding out a hand. Thank you for reminding us that what you do off the screen can matter even more than what you do on it. Keanu shook his hand, a humble smile breaking across his tired face. Thank you for saying that. The captain leaned in, his voice just above a whisper. It's a rare thing these days, someone willing to sit in the worst seat so someone else can have a better place in the world. Keanu looked past the captain at the bustling terminal, people hurrying to connections, hugging family, waving goodbye. For a second, he felt the weight of it all, every choice, every quiet act that stitched people together in ways they'd never see. It's just a seat, Keanu said, his voice steady but soft. But I guess sometimes a seat is everything. The captain smiled, clapping him gently on the shoulder. Safe travels, Mr. Reeves. Keanu watched the young mother disappear into the crowd, the teenager helping her push the stroller toward baggage claim. The older woman gave him one last warm smile before drifting away too, swallowed by the sea of people. Keanu pulled his hood up, slipping into the moving river of travelers. His steps were slow but certain, every bruise from that cramped seat a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts left the biggest mark. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this story, so ordinary, so simple, would find its way to other people, whispered like a soft truth that refused to die. And in a world that often forgot what kindness looked like, Keanu Reeves knew that being blocked in first class was the best thing that could have happened that day. Keanu Reeves stepped out into the terminal, the hum of voices and rolling suitcases echoing in his tired mind. His feet moved slow, careful, each step reminding him of the cramped hours in that tiny seat. But the ache in his back felt small compared to the warmth that settled deep in his chest. It was a strange thing, how one small act on a plane could make the whole world feel different when your feet touch the ground again. He tugged his hood low over his face, hoping to slip through unnoticed. It didn't always work, but he tried anyway. The last thing he wanted was flashing cameras or questions shouted across the terminal. He just wanted to find a quiet corner, maybe a cup of strong coffee, and a few moments alone to let his thoughts settle. But as he made his way past baggage claim, he noticed the young mother again. She was near the carousel, rocking her baby gently while struggling to keep her heavy bag from tipping over. The teenager from the plane stood beside her, still helping, his hands gripping the handle of the baby stroller like it was the most important job in the world. The sight stopped Keanu in his tracks. He felt a small, proud smile tug at his lips. The boy had listened. He had chosen not to look away. Just as he was about to keep moving, he caught something else. A man stood a few feet behind the mother, and the boy, his eyes were cold, sharp, watching the young mother in a way that made Keanu's stomach twist. The man wore a suit that didn't quite fit, his hair slicked back, a phone pressed to his ear. But his eyes never left the young mother. He didn't look like family waiting to help. He looked like trouble waiting to happen. Keanu's single quotes mind raced. He stepped closer, careful to stay in the shadows of a pillar. The mother hadn't noticed the man yet. Her eyes were too tired to focus on keeping her baby calm. The teenager said something to her, pointing at the carousel as their bags finally appeared. But the man with the slicked hair took a step closer, his mouth curling into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Keanu knew that look. He'd seen it before. People who thought they could own someone just because they were vulnerable. People who mistook kindness for weakness. The knot in his chest tightened. Old memories surfacing. Nights when he'd watched helplessly as people he loved were pushed down, cornered, taken advantage of because they didn't have someone to stand for them. Not this time, he told himself. Not today. He stepped out from behind the pillar and moved toward the mother. The man noticed him instantly, his smile fading, his eyes narrowing as if he'd just recognized Keanu for who he was. Keanu ignored him. He walked straight to the mother and the boy, his voice soft but firm. "Everything okay here?" The mother startled, her eyes wide until they landed on Keanu's face. Relief flooded through her features like sunlight breaking. Through a storm, the teenager's shoulders relaxed too, but the man in the suit stiffened. "You know him?" the man asked the mother, his voice slick like oil. The mother nodded quickly, hugging her baby tighter. "Yes, he's helping me." The man's jaw clenched, a fake smile stretching his lips. "That's nice. But she doesn't need help from strangers. She's got family business to handle." Keanu stepped forward, his body blocking the man's view of the mother and the boy. His tone stayed calm, but there was an edge to it now, like a knife wrapped in velvet. "She doesn't owe you anything. She's with me now. If you have something to say, you say it to me." The man's eyes flicked around, noticing the security cameras and people passing by. He leaned in closer, his words a hiss only Keanu could hear. "You think you can play hero, movie star? You think you can fix people's problems just because you gave up a fancy seat?" Keanu felt the heat rise in his chest, but he kept his voice steady, his eyes locked on the man's. "No, I can't fix everything, but I can stand here, and I will stand here. So if you want to try something, you better be ready to do it, where everyone can see." The man's fake smile cracked, his eyes darting to the security guards near the exit. He muttered something under his breath, then stepped back, pulling out his phone and pretending to scroll. But Keanu saw the threat in his eyes. This wasn't over. The man turned and disappeared into the crowd, melting away like a stain washed down a drain. But Keanu knew better than to trust an easy retreat. The mother let out a shaky breath, her knees almost giving out. The teenager put a steadying hand on her arm, his eyes wide with fear and all at once. "Thank you," the mother whispered, her voice trembling. He's been following me since I left my husband. I thought he wouldn't find us." Keanu rested a gentle hand on her shoulder. "He won't, you have my word. But you need help, real help, not just a kind stranger. In an airport, do you have somewhere safe to go?" The mother shook her head, tears welling up. "No. My sister said we could stay for a night, but..." Keanu looked at the boy. "What's your name?" The teenager straightened up. James. Keanu said, his voice warm but steady. "Stay with her until I come back. Can you do that?" James nodded fiercely, his grip on the stroller tightening like he was guarding a treasure. Keanu stepped away, pulling out his phone. His fingers moved fast, scrolling through old contacts until he found the name he needed. An old friend who ran a safe house for mothers and children in trouble. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe. No slick-haired men would get through the doors there. No one would be turned away. When Keanu returned, the mother's eyes were red from crying but brighter somehow, like the first crack of dawn breaking open a dark night. He handed her a slip of paper with an address and a name. "They're waiting for you. You go straight there, no stops. James will help you get a cab. They'll keep you safe. You'll have a bed, food, people who care, and no one will find you unless you want them to." The mother clutched the paper like it was the most precious thing she'd ever held. She didn't have words, only tears, only the soft thank you. "Thank you, thank you," that fell from her lips like a prayer. James stood beside her, taller somehow, shoulders squared like he understood now that kindness wasn't weakness. It was armor you wore when the world tried to break you. Keanu helped them load her bags into a taxi. He held the door open as James guided her in, the baby fussing quietly in her lap. He gave James a nod. A promise passed from one pair of hands to another. James nodded back, his eyes steady, a quiet courage blooming there that made Keanu's chest ache in the best way. As the taxi pulled away, Keanu stood at the curb, hands in his pockets, watching the taillights fade into the busy stream of cars. He felt the weight of what he'd done settle into his bones, not heavy, but strong. Like a tree putting down roots after a storm, people hurried past him, busy with their own stories, most never knowing what had just happened at the edge of the baggage claim. But maybe someone would remember seeing the tired man in the hoodie, standing between a mother and a man who thought he owned her future. Maybe they would carry that image with them, a soft reminder that respect, humility, resilience, and kindness were not just words, they were choices. Keanu took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs like a promise. He turned away from the curb, ready to face whatever came next, because he knew now that one blocked seat on a plane had turned into something bigger, something that would travel far beyond the runway, far beyond him. A story about standing up when you could sit down, about kindness that refused to stay. In first class, about a man who never stopped believing that sometimes all it took to change the world was to simply not look away. Keanu Reeves left the curb and stepped back into the crowded terminal, his hood pulled low again. He walked past families hugging, business people barking into phones, kids running in circles around luggage carts. The smell of burnt coffee and cheap fast food drifted through the air. But to Keanu, the world felt quieter somehow, like a deep breath after a storm. The image of the mother and her baby safe in that taxi, James at her side, stayed in his mind like a warm light. He made his way to the small coffee shop near the far end of the terminal, the place he always went when he needed to think. He ordered a black coffee, no sugar, and found an empty seat by the window. As he stirred the coffee slowly, he thought back to the plane, to the blocked first-class seat that had pushed him into economy, to the young mother, to James, to the slick-haired man who had watched her like she was his to own. What if he hadn't noticed? What if he'd stayed in first class? The thought made his chest tighten. He remembered his mother's words, spoken long ago when he was just a boy, who thought he could never be more than the weight of his family's struggles. One small act can move the biggest stones, but only if you stand up to push it. He had pushed tonight, in 100 small ways, and now the story was bigger than him. He wondered if the mother was telling James her story now in the back of that taxi. He hoped she would tell her baby someday that kindness is stronger than fear. His phone buzzed on the table, jolting him back to the present. He looked down and saw a text from a friend, the same friend who ran the safe house. "She's here. They're safe. You did good." Keanu let out a long breath he didn't even know he'd been holding. The coffee tasted warmer, the noise of the terminal softer somehow. He tucked his phone back into his pocket and leaned back, eyes drifting over the people outside the glass. How many other stories were walking past him right now? How many small cries for help went unheard every day because no one stopped long enough to listen? His thoughts were interrupted by a commotion at the counter. A flight attendant in a crisp uniform stood arguing with the barista. Her voice was polite, but her eyes were red, her shoulders stiff like they were holding back a flood. She held a small paper bag with a sandwich, her hands trembling so much she almost dropped it. The barista shrugged, pointing at a sign about credit cards only, no cash. The attendant looked down at the crumpled bills in her palm, her lips pressing together like she was fighting to hold herself together. Keanu didn't think twice. He stood, crossed the short distance, and slipped his card to the barista. "Put hers on mine." The attendant spun around, surprise written all over her tired face. No, you don't have to do that." Keanu smiled, soft but certain. "I know I don't have to, but I want to." She clutched the bag of food to her chest like it was the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you, it's for my dad. He's in the hospital. I'm flying standby to get back to him. I spent my last money on this because the food there, it's terrible." Keanu's chest tightened again, but in a good way. The ache that came with knowing a single meal could mean so much. "What's his name?" Keanu asked gently. "Harold," she said, her voice cracking. "They say he might not have long." Keanu placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. The simplest touch, but it steadied her like an anchor. "Tell Harold there's a man out there thinking of him tonight. And you hold your head high. You're doing more than enough. You're doing everything." Her eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. "Thank you," she whispered again before hurrying out into the terminal, clutching the bag like a lifeline. Keanu watched her go, his heart full and heavy all at once. He knew he might never see her again, never know if her father made it through the night, but he also knew that in the middle of her fear and exhaustion, She would remember the stranger who paid for a sandwich without asking why. Maybe one day, she would do the same for someone else. Maybe that's how the world changed. Not all at once, but one small act at a time. He sat back down, staring into his coffee until it went cold. He didn't care. In his mind, he saw James helping the young mother, the safe house door closing behind them, the captain on the plane announcing his name for a small act that made people think for 5 quiet minutes about what it meant to be kind. He saw the flight attendant holding her father's hand, telling him about the stranger in the terminal who reminded her not to give up. He looked up and caught the eyes of an old janitor mopping the floor nearby. Their eyes met for just a moment. To strangers, nothing more, but the old man nodded, as if he knew, as if he saw what everyone else missed in the blur of their own busy lives. Keanu picked up his coffee, still warm enough to sip, and raised it slightly toward the janitor in a quiet toast. The old man gave him a small smile before going back to his work. Each swipe of his mop a silent promise that respect, humility, and resilience didn't wear fancy clothes or sit in first class. Keanu felt his tiredness settle deeper in his bones, but this time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt like purpose. He knew he couldn't fix every problem, couldn't fight every battle for every person who felt invisible, but he could stand up in small places, in line at the gate, in a crowded plane, at a coffee shop counter. He could push the stone, even just an inch, so someone else could breathe a little easier. He glanced at the departure screens, the lines of cities and times flickering like a river of second chances. He didn't know where he would go next, but he knew one thing for certain. No matter where he sat, first class or the cramped back row, he would keep watching, keep standing, keep reminding himself that one blocked seat was never the end of the story. And somewhere, he hoped, people like James and the young mother and the flight attendant would remember too. Keanu Reeves stayed in that corner seat by the coffee shop window until the terminal started to empty out. The sun was dipping low, turning the airport glass walls gold and pink, shadows stretching long across the tiled floor. People drifted by in clusters, families reunited with hugs, tired travelers dragging suitcases, flight crews hurrying to their gates. Each one carried their own story. Hidden behind sleepy eyes and polite smiles, Keanu watched them pass, letting his coffee grow cold in his hands. He felt the weight of the day in his bones, not just the bruises from the cramped plane seat or the sore muscles from standing too long, but the quiet ache of caring, the ache of knowing that the world could be so quick to turn away, to look past the small battles people fought alone every day. He thought about the mother and her baby, about James and his shy courage, about the slick-haired man who thought fear was stronger than hope. He thought about the flight attendant with her father waiting in a hospital bed, the janitor who had seen him when no one else had. The stories wove together in his mind like threads of an old blanket, worn but warm, fragile but strong. He thought back to the moment when the captain's voice had crackled through the plane speakers, telling everyone what he had done. How a simple thing like giving up a seat had reminded people that respect and kindness could travel farther than a plane ever could. In that small gesture, he saw something bigger, the truth that you didn't need a spotlight or a stage to make a difference. You just needed to look, to listen, to not turn away. A soft voice pulled him out of his thoughts. He looked up to see James standing there again, the same teenager who'd sat beside him on the flight. His hair was messy from running, his cheeks pink from the cold outside. He had a small bag slung over his shoulder, like he'd just come from the safe house. "Hey," James said, shifting from foot to foot. "I saw you through the window. I wanted to say thank you again." Keanu smiled, pushing the extra chair out with his foot. James sat down, looking older than he had on. The plane, like one day, had turned him into someone braver. "How's she doing?" Keanu asked. "Better," James said. "She's got people around her now. They helped her find a lawyer. She's gonna fight him, that man. She's not running anymore." He paused, his eyes bright with something new. "She said she never would have found the courage if you hadn't stepped in." Keanu shook his head slowly. "It wasn't just me, James. You stood with her too. You chose to help. You didn't have to." James ducked his head, a shy grin tugging at his lips. Yeah, I guess it felt right, like it was my turn. Keanu leaned back, watching the boy across the table. Good. Hold on to that feeling. The world will tell you it doesn't matter, that being kind won't change anything. Don't believe that. It does. It always does. James nodded, his eyes wide and certain. For a moment, they just sat in the quiet hum of the airport, to strangers bound by something no one else could see. The small thread of hope that ran from one act of kindness to another. Where are you going now? James asked. Keanu shrugged, a tired smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Home, maybe. Or maybe somewhere I'm needed. Who knows? I think the world has a funny way of putting you in the right place if you're paying attention. Jam. East looked thoughtful, like he was tucking the words away to keep them safe. Then he stood, pulling his bag higher on his shoulder. I hope I see you again someday. Keanu reached out, clasping the boy's shoulder. You will, and even if you don't, you'll see this. You'll see it every time you stand up for someone who can't stand alone. James grinned, his shoulders squared, his steps stronger as he walked away into the river of people flowing toward the exit. Keanu watched him go, a quiet pride blooming in his chest. He picked up his coffee, lifted it slightly in a silent toast to the boy, to the mother and her baby, to the flight attendant and her father, to everyone who would carry this story forward, like a small flame against the dark. As the last boarding call for the night echoed through the terminal, Keanu stood and slung his old bag over his shoulder. He knew the night would come, the crowds would thin, the lights would dim. Tomorrow, people would sit in first class again. Some would be blocked to the back. Some would look away when they saw someone struggling. But not everyone, not always, because maybe, just maybe, a few more people would remember what they'd heard about a man who gave up his seat so someone else could breathe easier. Maybe they'd remember that kindness does not care where you sit. It only cares if you stand. And as Keanu stepped onto the next plane, a small smile tugging at his tired lips, he knew one thing for certain: he would always stand.